In this video, I just want to tell you my story, how I went from basic school English to studying abroad, passing IELTS, and eventually living in New Zealand. And maybe something from my story will give you ideas, some inspiration, or a bit of hope to keep going on your own English journey. You know, I didn't wake up one morning speaking English fluently. I started exactly where most of us do, learning little by little, making mistakes, and trying again and again. And it was hard. Everything I'm going to tell you today, I built step by step back home, long before living abroad. I started learning English at school when I was 7. We began with the basics, the alphabet, simple words, and a bit of grammar. You know, really elementary stuff. To be honest, our lessons weren't very interactive. We mostly did reading and workbook exercises, and there wasn't much real communication practice. So my progress was pretty slow. But there was one activity that really stood out to me. And even though I didn't realize it back then, I now think it was brilliant. Every year we had to take a spoken English exam, where we had to talk about simple topics like about me, my family, my hobbies, and the weather. And to prepare for that spoken exam, throughout the year we had to write little scripts on those topics. We had to think about what we would say, write it, and then practice it. And here's the thing. I don't believe in memorizing scripts word for word. It sounds unnatural and stressful, and your mind goes blank as soon as you panic. But the process of writing those little texts is incredibly useful. Because when you write, you give your brain time to form sentences. You think about vocabulary. You practice expressing your thoughts in English, slowly and calmly, without pressure. Writing first actually prepared me for speaking. And here's a tip I wish I knew back then. Instead of writing one script and repeating it, it's more powerful to write several versions over time. Same topic, new vocabulary, new phrases. Each time you write it differently, you add some details. You train your brain to form English sentences from different angles. You build many natural options. So when the exam comes, or later when you talk in real life, you don't need to memorize anything. You already know how to talk about it. And to make writing those scripts easier, you don't have to do everything in one sitting. Just write in small chunks. A few sentences today, a few more tomorrow. Little by little, your script grows and it feels much more manageable. For example, one week you write, "My hobby is dancing. I go every weekend." A week later, "I've been dancing since I was 5. It makes me happy and confident." Try this method. Choose one topic and write short paragraphs about it again and again, but in different ways. It helps build those neural pathways and makes speaking much more natural. Now, here's another important part of that stage. Around the age of 10, I started singing in English. Pop songs, Britney Spears, and other popular singers at the time. We even performed at school events. And honestly, I didn't understand everything in those songs. But I imitated the sounds, the rhythm, the pronunciation. I copied the melody of English. And I believe that made a difference for my accent and pronunciation later. It didn't feel like an English lesson. It was fun. And that's a big lesson too. When you learn through something you enjoy, your brain absorbs more. Learning English works best when it feels natural, creative, and enjoyable, not stressful. When I was around 20, I had the chance to go to Germany for a summer school program at one of the universities. We studied a few subjects in English, And that was such a great experience. It wasn't an English-speaking country, and everyone there was using English as a second language. Professors, students. So I felt more relaxed. I didn't feel embarrassed to make mistakes because we were all learners. And honestly, that was amazing. That experience really helped me use English in real life and start trusting myself more when speaking. But before that, even back home in Russia, I tried to create my own English world. I joined an English-speaking club at my university. I went to British Council events and even became a member of their library. I joined a volunteer project where we visited orphanages with international volunteers. So I had to speak English with them. And I loved it. At home, I switched into English mode completely. I changed the language on my phone and laptop. I wrote notes in English. I only watched English videos. And on my way to university, which sometimes took a couple of hours, I listened to English podcasts. All of those little things prepared me for the IELTS exam I took in 2010. I got a 6.5 overall with the highest scores in listening and reading and 6.5 in speaking. And honestly, that's very common when you are not living in an English-speaking country. You usually understand more than you can say. But that's the thing. I achieved all of that before I ever lived in an English-speaking country. So if you aren't living abroad yet, don't worry. You can build fluency from home. In 2011, I moved to Germany again to do my master's degree in economics. And everything was in English. Lectures, group work, exams, full immersion. By that time, I already felt more confident. And studying in English every day pushed my fluency to the next level. Then in 2013, I moved to New Zealand. And that was another surprise. I realized very quickly that textbook English and real spoken English are not always the same thing. Before that, I was using too proper English. It was the kind you learn from books, very formal, very structured, but not how people actually talk in real life. I could easily say things like, as a matter of fact, nevertheless, but I didn't really know how to use English appropriately in everyday conversations. It sounded polite and correct, but also a bit unnatural. I was hearing sentences like, you're going to the party, instead of, are you going to the party? And I thought, wait, where is the grammar? Why are they dropping words? And then came the slang. Sweet as, yeah, nah. Thanks heaps. Even the pronunciation was different. For example, in New Zealand, pen can sound almost like pin. I'll never forget one day when my boss asked me for a pin. I looked around and said, a pin? What do you mean? And he laughed and said, no, a pen. That's when I realized how big those small pronunciation differences can be. That's when I started learning real English, the kind people actually speak every day. And I realized that every English-speaking country has its own flavor, its own expressions and rhythm. So it takes a bit of time to adjust. In the beginning, fluency was still difficult, especially humor. When I wanted to make a joke, I would translate it in my head first, and by the time I was ready to say it, everyone had already moved on. That was frustrating. I felt stiff in English, not relaxed yet. But I always reminded myself, this is temporary. If I keep going, it will get easier. Slowly, I stopped translating and I started thinking in English. Speech became smoother, confidence grew, jokes finally landed on time. And that's when I knew I had crossed the bridge into fluency. One more thing that helped me a lot, writing a diary in English. not worrying about grammar, just expressing my thoughts freely, regularly. That exercise alone improved my fluency more than almost anything else because it trained my brain to think directly in English. And I still believe this. Fluency is not about being perfect. It's about feeling comfortable in the language, trusting yourself, and using English in your daily life as much as you can. If my story inspired you, tell me in the comments.